So, on the behalf of the tutorial organizers, I heartily welcome you all to the first tutorial of ICWSM 2021, which is going to be about hate speech, its detection, mitigation, and beyond. So before we get started off, this is a bit of background about ourselves. So we are a bunch of people working in actively in hate speech and similar domains relating to ethics and AI. So most of us are located in India, and we are connected to the Indian Institute of Technology Kharagpur by some profession as either a faculty or a PhD student. And we also have our collaborator Kiran Garimela from MIT, so who is actively collaborating with us on various projects and has been instrumental in designing various parts of this tutorial. So before we start off, like as you, I guess, would well appreciate that this presentation might contain materials which people might find offensive and hateful, but then this cannot be avoided because of the nature of the work that we are going to present. So, so this is just a bit of a disclaimer that we wanted to put forward before we start off. So I guess like it's well acknowledged in the scientific community that hate speech is a growing concern. And it's not only limited within the scientific community, but it seems like various tech giants have also taken this up seriously. For instance, when we went into different search engines, for example, everywhere when we typed keywords like fight hate, there was like a autocomplete which actually gave further cues to additional keywords that could be potentially related to fighting hate. And some of them are pretty interesting, like the one that you see here, fight hate speech with more speech, about which we are going to talk about a little later. So, but then these are some of the very relevant additional keywords that we see already being suggested by the tech giants. Similarly, for Twitter, when we searched with the same keyword, we found like various relevant handles which are actually dealing with fighting hate speech. And some of them have quite a large number of followers. So unfortunately, the only exception was Facebook. When we searched something like fight hate on Facebook, which we did not get many autocomplete suggestions, but maybe this is because of the personalized nature of Facebook. Before we delve into the core of the tutorial, let us try to set our expectations correctly. So what does one expect to get from this tutorial? So basically what we will try to discuss in depth is what is the problem? Is it really an important problem, and how deep are the repercussions of this problem? So just to motivate ourselves a little bit, I would like to take you back to this United Nations Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech, which was signed in 2019 May, where the UN General actually notes down the following in his foreword, that this is something that is disturbing groundswell of xenophobia, racism, intolerance, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim hatred, persecution of Christians, and things like that. Then he goes on to talk about neo-Nazi and white supremacy. I He also talks about dehumanization and then demoralization of migrants, refugees, etc. And in the second paragraph, he further notes like that the UN has taken it up as an important agenda to tackle hate speech and to deepen their progress in research as to how to contain or prevent things like armed conflict, atrocity, crimes, terrorism, and violence that may be caused due to online hate speech. So, in the final section, he noted that he's in a fear, he himself and the entire UN Council is in a fear that this might be a very acute moment, and it is very important to battle this demon, and therefore they actually set up a group of senior advisors to come up with a strategy and plan of action. And as a result of this meeting of the senior advisors, what came up was the following. So the UN in this strategy and plan of action meeting set up the following key commitments. So which include monitoring and analyzing hate speech, addressing root causes, drivers and actors of hate speech, using technology, and using education as a tool for addressing and countering hate speech. So these were some of the milestones that they had set forward. And our tutorial is kind of more or less organized in the spirit of these key commitments. So a little bit more detail. So the part one of the tutorial will talk more about the UN key commitment relating to monitoring and analyzing hate speech. Basically, we will try to answer empirically some of the questions like, does hate speech spread in the online world? Like, can one comment on the speed and the depth of the spread? Okay, can one use certain computational approaches to do this? Can there be some quantitative measures, algorithms devised so that the speed and depth could be measured? And are there any long-lasting effects? Again, like if there are, can those be measured using certain computational techniques? The second part of the tutorial will again concentrate on the second key commitment of the UN, that was the addressing the root causes, drivers, and use of technology. So the question is like, what could be the first step to handle this issue? Like the first step that comes to our mind is to be able to detect, somehow detect the presence of hate speech, okay, in the online world using again certain computer algorithms with probably human in the loop. So, and then like once we have these detection models, like we cannot directly go and flag them because there might be various false positives out there, might be various cases which should not be flagged but are getting flagged. So therefore the results need a solid explanation. So whatever results are returned by the models, by the hate speech detection models, should be explained in the light of the predictions that they are making. So that is one another important issue that needs to be tackled. And the last thing is like, are there models, model biases? Okay, are there biases in the evaluation of the system? Okay, and if there are such biases existing, then what sort of biases? Are these biases like coming from the model? Are these biases coming from the data? Are these biases coming from the annotation quality? Are these biases coming because of the different targets or the victims of hate speech? So there could be various reasons of biases, and we'll be trying to talk about a few of them in the coming parts of the tutorial. So the third part of the tutorial is again concentrating on the third commitment, which is about countering hate speech. So basically here we try to look into mechanisms as to how to contain online hate speech. Like And so are there any conflicts? Like if you try to contain online hate speech, you will end up in a conflict situation with the notions of freedom of speech. Okay, and can there be like intelligent ways or tricky ways to counter hate speech without disturbing the notion of the freedom of speech? And this could be done by using more speech, which is also typically termed as counter speech. And then once we develop this notion of counter speech, the next immediate question is that, is counter speech generic, or is it specific across different victim or target communities? So that is what the second thing that we are going to look into a little bit, and it would be like a very nice addition if we could use technology, especially the natural language generation technologies, in order to automatically generate counter speech, because generating counter speech using using a manual effort by having a large number of volunteers is often very tedious, and also maybe psychologically not a very good option. So therefore, if one can use the modern developments of NLP in order to automatically generate counter speech, then that would be a big plus. So these are some of the things that we are going to discuss in the part 3 of the tutorial. And in bonus, we will also discuss a little bit about the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats in this field. So we will try to summarize our tutorial with these 4 directions. And finally, we will talk about a little bit of the different resources that we have gathered into a Notion page. We will share this with all our participants, so that once they go back from the tutorial, this remains as a ready reference for them. So this is kind of a take home for everyone, so to say. And then we will also try to have some hands-on demonstration, to motivate further, how people can do very simple experiments using certain models that we and many other groups have developed over the last few years. Okay, so I think my learned audience will not require a motivation regarding the negative consequences that the hate speech and similar abusive behavior in the online world has brought to the offline world. There has been many negative consequences in the offline world, which are known to be triggered, or which are at least hypothesized to be triggered by the online world. For instance, the Bulandshahr violence, the Pittsburgh shooting, Christchurch shooting, the Rohingya genocide. These are some of the examples that we have cited. There are many, many such, with the recent one being the Delhi riots related to the anti-CA and anti-NRC movement. So, of course, we are not the first people doing this kind of similar themed tutorial. There has been 2 other such tutorials in the past, one in CIK in 2020 and the other one in ICWSM 2018. But we have tried to keep our content as different from these tutorial that has been done in the past, and we have tried to pump in new materials. And as I said, we have tried to structure it as per the UN commitment, which was not really done in the previous 2 tutorials. So overall, this is the table of contents, the formal table of contents for this tutorial. We will start with a few definitions and related concepts. Then we will talk about the analysis, where we will look into the prevalence of hate speech, how it spreads in the network, with what speed, at what depth, and then we will talk a little bit about the long-lasting effects. In the detection part, we will be talking about datasets. We will be talking about the traditional methods in hate speech detection, which were developed in the early 2016, 2015. Then we will come to sequential models that were developed like close to 2018 and 2017. And then we will go to the transformer-based models, like which are one of the state-of-the-art architectures that are being used in hate speech classification. And then we will talk about the pitfalls of evaluation, the explainability of the models, and the biases, if any, existing in the different facets of the model. Then the last part of the content will be mostly about the mitigation of hate speech, where we will talk a little bit about the campaigns that have been like started off by various tech giants as well as NGOs in order to prevent the spread of hate speech. Then we will talk about counter-speech detection and counter-speech generation, and then finally some of the realistic effects of counter-speech. And we will end up with the SWOT analysis. So as we start off, like there is always this question that what is the definition of hate speech, or like is there any concrete definition? So it is like understood that this is an ill-defined problem, I would say. But then in order to make all the computer models work, one has to resort to some sort of a working definition. And we have borrowed the working definition from one of the seminal papers of El-Sharif that was published in 2016, where they state that hate speech is some sort of a direct and serious attack on any protected category of people based on their race or ethnicity or national origin or religion, sex, gender, sexual orientation, disability, or disease. Now, hate speech could be both directed as well as generalized. The directed hate speech is typically like having a single victim, an individual as a victim, whereas the generalized hate speech is typically of the form where the hate speech targets an overall community. So which is kind of in majority of cases a minority community or a protected community. And in general, the literature is heavy on the second type of hate speech analysis, that is the generalized hate speech. So there are much more works in the area of generalized hate speech than directed hate speech. People typically consider community-specific hate speech when they do most of their analysis, as you will see in the course of the tutorial. So again, like as we have seen, like whenever, even now, like after publishing quite a few papers, even now when we submit a paper, we very often get this query that like what exactly is hate speech and how does it differ from various other similar concepts. This is a very important point, actually. So many of our reviewers and even esteemed colleagues in the community have this question time and again. So Fortuna, in their 2018 survey, which was published in the ACM Computing Surveys, came up with this very nice taxonomy, where they discussed like various different but very related concepts around hate speech and abusive behavior in the online world. So they categorize it into hate, cyberbullying, discrimination, flaming, abusive language, profanity, toxicity, extremism, radicalization. So each of them have been very well defined and well structured in their paper, and the definitions are taken from previous standard references. In our tutorial, we will be mostly like highlighting the hate and the abusive language behavior. These are the two things that we are going to majorly cover in our tutorial. Okay, so by hate, we mean expression of hostility, without any stated explanation for it. So the kind of definition that I just outlined in the previous slide. And abusive language is like something which is a little at a higher level than hate speech, which is is used to refer to any harmful language, okay, that includes hate speech, derogatory language, and profanity. So the boundaries are very, very thin, so they are very narrow. In order to make the distinction clear, we wanted to have it very concretely specified at the very beginning of the tutorial. So hate speech could feature in various different contexts. It could be dependent on the platform, by which I mean the online platform. It could be dependent on the demography. It could be dependent on the language and the culture of the people who are connected to this platform. There are, in fact, focused research related to racism and hate speech, related to misogyny and hate speech, related to xenophobia and hate speech. So there are various such specific groups around which hate speech analysis and detection has been done in the past. And in fact, there are also topical contexts around which hate speech analysis has been done, like genetic testing, which is like a very interesting idea, where the authors in 2020 show that how genetic testing methods and its outcomes are being discussed in online conversations, and far-right and alt-right communities are trying to weaponize these outcomes in order to, empirically prove fake ideas about genetic purity. So this is a very interesting paper, and I would invite many of you who are interested in this specific area to go back and have a look into this paper. The second one is equally interesting. This is about QAnon. I guess quite a few of you are already aware of this. There is also a Wikipedia entry related to this. So this is again a conspiracy theory spread by the white supremacists and the far-right supporters who say that there is an anti-campaign going on against Mr. Donald Trump, and most of these anti-campaigners have a very specific sexual orientation. So these are some of the very interesting topically geared studies around hate speech. So I would stop over here and hand over to Purnojoy to carry forward with the analysis of hate speech.
So yeah, I mean, sorry, I think there were some complaints about the mic. So please, when you're talking, check your microphone, just to. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't see those before. Yeah, go ahead, Punja.
Yeah, okay. So should I share this? You can.
I'll stop sharing.
So can all of you hear my voice like this, right? Okay. Okay, so you can see the screen, right? So let me start. So the first topic is for analysis and spread of hate speech. So here, basically, the overall phenomenon of hate speech analyzed, and we try to study the prevalence and effect. So in the recent times, many of you may have observed different alternate platforms getting popping up due to the moderation in the mainstream platforms like Twitter, YouTube, etc. This platform generally champion freedom of speech. Like for Twitter there is Gab, for Instagram there is 4chan, for YouTube there is BitChute, which are just the moderation-free versions of these platforms. But soon enough, these platforms turned into the main source of hate and fake news, as you can see from the reports in the back. In Gab, early signals show different types of hashtags which come up into the frequency ranking, like alt-right and Banistan, which further motivates us to study this platform in terms of hate content. In another study, they found out that the posts of hateful users diffuse significantly in farther, wider, deeper, and faster than the non-hateful users. So this was done using the repost network of these users, and again the repost network was created using the crawling the users and all. Further, a study also measured the number of hateful users in various cores of network. So a popular strategy to measure the centrality of the users is to identify what is the fraction of users in different cores. This is typically done using K-core analysis. Now, over time, what happened, if you can see that the users were increasing, the hateful users are increasing in the inner cores. One of the typical points where this got a major jump was this Unite the Right rally. Similarly, other platforms are studied in the same light, and in 4chan also, there are around 27% severe toxic messages, which is really a concerning factor. Similarly, for BitChute, 75% of the comments were hate speech based on a keyword-based lexicon. Further, 21% of the videos had hate speech as a comment. If you see the green cluster here, that is very closely linked, this actually constituted around 12% of the total channels and received 87% of the comments. Again, out of this, they found that 55% are hate speech. So this further motivates us to study this platforms and their type of hate content in them. Now moving on to the platforms with moderation. So naturally, one of the key challenges while dealing with platform with moderation is that people or content might get moderated, which is clear from this figure, which in the red bar, which shows the hateful users. As you can see, most of their joining date are towards the end of the the collection of data, which suggests that they may have gotten moderated due to the Twitter's policy. Hence, it is difficult to study the overall evolution of such users, but this paper tries to study the characteristics of such users in different strategies. So one of the characteristics they found was that these users are actually power users. What I mean by that is they post more and favorite more. As you can see in this graph, that between the red bar and the blue bar. Similarly, the median hate user, which is calculated using some centrality metrics, is more central to the network. This is also visualized using different centrality measures. Another platform to study is Reddit, which has recently banned several subreddits. One of the subreddits that was banned was this incel subreddit. And many of the users in that subreddit migrated to brain cells. This paper tried to study this subreddit and several other subreddits which were typically misogynistic, and they found that there was an increase in misogynistic content. Particularly for this subreddit, the Brain Cell subreddit, they found that the content again increased after a particular hate crime attack. That was Alex Alex Toronto by an attack. The similar effect was seen in the user's journey, which also increased after this timeline. If you can follow this brown line here, it has increased just after this particular hate crime took place. Now, as mentioned in the introduction itself, the targets of the hate speech might vary. This paper tried to study this in two platforms, and one of the main important point is this is before this moderation was very strict. So there exists some a large amount of hate speech in Twitter as well. As we can see, the proportion of different targets is varying across Twitter and Facebook, but based on the ranking, we can see the categories are almost constant. So race, behavior, and physical categories of hate speech are almost constant in both the platforms. Apart from the proportion of hate speech, the way which the hate groups tries to target different communities is also very different. In a recent study, they tried to use framing to understand how the hate groups use communication to influence their audience. The framing was analyzed in three parts. First is diagnostic, second prognostic, and third motivation. So coming to the diagnostic part, here the main problem is identified. So let's take, for example, climate change. So what is the main problem? So one of the main problem can be the inaction and silence of different government agencies. Second is the prognostic part. Here, the solution to the problem is identified. So again, for climate change, we can here they can suggest that we should follow the Paris Agreement and IPCC rules. Finally, the motivation. So the motivation is actually for finding the solution. So what is the need for the solution? Again, for climate change, we can identify there is a crisis, and for the crisis, we can feel fear. And due to that fear, it is important to find the solution. Similar to this, the hate groups also try different methods or different framings to target their different communities. For example, anti-Muslim hate groups use operation as a diagnostic frame, but they try to study that the particular Muslim community is trying to oppress them, as can be seen in this example here. Whereas anti-LGBT hate groups use immorality as a main diagnostic frame. This is also shown using an example. For the prognostic part, anti-Muslim hate groups usually suggest policy changes. So the policy changes can be in the form of sign this petition to demand someone's resignation, who is maybe supporting Muslims or something. And similarly for anti-LGBT hate groups, although policy changes there, one of the other main prognostic framing is call for membership. Here they call and meet and greet like-minded people, and they usually have this kind of messages. One of the interesting factors is when we see the motivational framing, it is more or less always fear for both these groups. Now, one of the important or the challenging problem for hate speech analysis is the emergence of new racial slurs. This is particularly evident due to this current COVID-19 pandemic. And a recent paper found that there was an increase in xenophobia due to this. And this increase was not only in numbers, but also the kind of keywords that were used. As you can see in the top keywords, you can see different bat soap, biolab, which are coming up as different racial slurs. Now we want to understand what is the effect of hate speech. Although different literature suggests that there is a significant amount of psychological effect of hate speech. But it is important to quantify it, to understand how the people who are actually victims of it feel. So in one of the studies, which was in before social media was even existing, was this interview-based study, which revealed that short-term effect was emotional, and long-term effect was attitudinal. This was after interviewing several people who are actually victims of such hate speech. When asked about their about the hate speakers' motive, they usually identify ignorance towards their community and repressed hostility as as two of the most speculated motives. One of the interesting points was that most participants prefer passive response or no response. So they don't want to respond to those who are speaking hate speech. Now, one of the vulnerable population that can be highly affected by hate speech is the college goers or students. In this paper, they try to study what is the amount of hate speech in college subreddits. They found that behavior was one of the important category of hate speech. Although, if you see the banned subreddit, which was the subreddits which are banned in 2015 due to hate speech, they are much less than that. But there is a significant amount of hate speech which is very concerning. Further, there exists a significant difference between the stress level of hate exposed group and hate not exposed groups. This is again done using a stress detector algorithm, which is ML based method. And if you see the graph, there exists a significant difference between those who are stressed, who are exposed by hate speech and who are not. Finally, as we have seen in the initial sections of the analysis, there were some events which are affecting hate speech. Now it is important to understand what is the effect of such offline events. So the offline events can be of two types. One which is done by some of the community members. This can be like Islamic terrorism, and others which are hate crime or which are done on the community. In the first study here, they try to understand what is the effect and response to hate crimes. They took different participants like direct victims, indirect victims, etc., and found that direct victims are less empathetic towards other victims. Further, the longitudinal study, which was done in a gap of 3 months, they found that many of the behavioral intentions, which the participants say that they want to do that to like avoid, like spread awareness or avoid hate speech, many of them were not transformed into actual behaviors. Finally, in this study, they try to understand what is the effect of hate crime and terrorism on hate and counter speech. But this paper they specifically focused on the Islamic community. So for different terrorist events by the Islamic community and Islamophobic attacks on different people. Now, one of the important observation was that terms with violence and offense increased after terrorism, but not after hate crime. The similar observation was seen for the counter speech, which was again increased after terrorism, but not after hate crime. So here, again, hate and counter speech were identified using some terms, and there may be some false positives. The next, I'll move on to the next part, which is detection of hate speech. Now, in the previous sections, most of the analysis was done using keyword-based detection, or was like few of them were also perspective API, which is a API provided by I think Jigsaw, which can detect hate, different types of hate. But both of them have different challenges. So the keyword-based detection has a chance of getting false positives, and we do not know the architecture of the dataset used in case of perspective. Hence, it is important to find out, first of all, what are the detection methods to detect hate speech, and secondly, what are the challenges of such methods. So before moving on to the detection methods or features, we first try to understand what are the different data sets that are there. In the survey, in this survey, there is directions in abusive language training data, garbage in and garbage out. They present a beautiful summary of such data sets that are present. The first point is that different data sets have different taxonomy. So for you are binary classification, that is hate or not, or whether targeting group or not. Then there are specific binary hate speech datasets, which are focused on more specific parts of hate speech, like misogyny or not, and racism. And finally, there are more general datasets like multi-class or multi-diversity. Further, for the different datasets of again different sources, as you can see here, but one of the major sources is Twitter. The reason behind this is Twitter API, which is very easily accessible, and hence there are more datasets about it. Two of the highly used datasets here are Davidson, which is done in 2017, and Fountain 2018. One of the challenges in this alt-right platforms, which somehow justifies their lack of dataset, is that they are often taking. So you may have heard about taking down a vote or parlor. Hence, the studies are necessarily less. There are datasets of different languages also, although English is one of the prominent ones, as in many other NLP tasks. Recently, many other languages like Arabic, Italian, Indonesian are also coming. Across all these datasets, one of the main questions is about the quality of the datasets. And finally, since English is one of the prominent ones, it is an important question to ask that if we can use the knowledge in English language dataset and transfer it to other languages where the resource that may be low resource or have less data. Finally, the training size and amount of hate and abuse also varies across datasets. Although more or less, the hate contents, most of the hate datasets contain around 10,000 to 15,000 points, whereas the amount of abuse stays around 25%, 50%. So after the brief discussion of datasets, let's move to the features. So these are specifically features used in very early detection methods. So in this study, they used a large number of features like TF-IDF vectors, parts of speech tags, and linguistic features like sentiment lexicon. And these model or this methods are still very applicable in the current world.
Sorry, Puneja, your internet is breaking up.
Yeah, Puneja, your internet is going down somehow.
Can you go back to the previous slide? I think we lost you for like 30 seconds or so. Maybe you can also turn off your video if that helps.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's better to turn off your video. Please reshare the slides.
Yeah. So where should I start from this slide?
Yeah, this slide, the last point, maybe we lost.
Okay. So let me start from here. So the last point is about the training size and the amount of hate abuse in different data sets. And you can see the description from this graphs. Although the more or less the size of the training data sets varies around 10,000 to 15,000 points, and the amount of hate speech in percentage varies around 25% to 50%. Coming to the detection methods, there are different features used. So in this paper, by Davidson, they have used different features like TF-ID vectors, parts of speech tags, linguistic features. Linguistic features can be like sentiment lexicons or readability scores. And this is a very good baseline even now. With the advent of deep learning era, different embeddings came up, which are again used in this hate speech content. So a few of them were this word embeddings. One of them used was tutored word embeddings. And for sentence embedding, Google's universal embedding. So you can check the link later to understand how this works. Among the detection methods, SVM was a very popular method pre the deep learning era, and it also featured in many shared tasks. In the deep learning era, recurrent networks like LSTM and GRU were taking up, and one of the models, CNN GRU, was the past state of the art before the transforms model picked up pace. As you can see in this figure, the CNN GRU model actually comprises of two parts. First is the convolution network, and second is the GRU network. While the convolution network actually captures the locality of the mappings of the features, the GRU embeddings capture the sequentiality of them. And as seen in this results here, you can see it reads almost all the baselines of all the previous state of the art based on different data sets. Although there were a lot of methods pre-transformers era, most of them could not capture the context very well. Here, the BERT and other transformer models seem to solve this problem a bit. But usually have two steps. First is the pre-training one, pre-training step and the fine-tuning step. While the pre-training is done on an unlabeled corpus, the fine-tuning is typically done on domain-specific data, or which is labeled already. So for us, most of the times, this pre-training BERT is already present. We need to only fine-tune it on different data sets. In this paper, they tried, along with this pre-trained embedding from BERT, they also tried CNN and LSTM and found that this further helped to improve the state of the performance. Many other papers tried to introduce lexicons into the BERT architecture. So here you see they use a specific lexicon known as HERTLEX and generate one-hot encodings of this, and finally use them in the dense layer. Another strategy to increase the performance of hate speech detection is retraining of BERT. So in this retraining, it is very similar to pre-training, where they have, let's say, a sentence which has two masks or two unknowns. And the transformer model has to predict what will come in this place. This training is done using the band subrated data, which has a higher percentage of hate content. As obvious, this retraining actually helped them get state-of-the-art performance in many of the data sets. So most of these previous works are based on like monolingual setting, and there was a lack of analysis of multilingual models across different languages and data sets. So this study in 2020 actually analyzed 9 different languages and 16 data sets with different models, as shown in the table here. In the low research setting, where there are few training samples, LASER plus LR. LASER is a multilingual embedding, and LR is logical regression. This LASER plus LR model actually dominate in the low research setting, whereas for the high research setting, the results are mostly mixed. Although we can see that MBERT actually, which is a code name for multilingual BERT, is actually taking like dominance in many of the data sets. Now, one of the important challenges is how to improve cross-lingual transfer. So as mentioned in the initial datasets part, we want to improve the performance of English dataset, model straight out English dataset when they transfer to other languages. This is the basic idea behind this paper, which tried to introduce a better feature extraction module, which is represented by this red box. And they got a better performance in different different transfers. So English to Spanish and Spanish to English. But this was mostly based on this hate eval data, and more experience on variety of datasets is still required. Again, one of the key strategies in improving performance is this pre-training, which is similar to the previous pre-training that we discussed. You have to break the mask keyword, but it is more or less done on the multilingual dataset. And if you follow this purple graph with cross hatching, you can see that it is improving the performance viably. Another important aspect of hate speech is the presence of hate speech in image plus text. Now, this kind of studies were not present in until this paper, 2019. But they introduced one of the largest dataset that is present in this domain, which is MMHS 150K, which had around 10,000 hate content divided into different parts, and the rest were not hit out of this 150,000 total dataset. One of the important things that we found was that the text-based models were almost at par with the multimodal models. So the multimodal models included both text and image, but still they could not beat the text-based model. Next, we present a timeline of shared tasks and try to discuss some commonality between them. So more or less, the hate-free shared task started in 2018 with the first task being evaluate AMI, which was based on the task was by misogyny detection, and most of this earlier task was based on one of the particular type of hate speech, and the models were more or less based on such SVM or regression based model. With 2020, BORD was taking prominence as different competitions. BORD was taking the leaderboard, and we can see many of the datasets were actually multilingual here. In the last step, now the community is focusing on other types of hate speech. For example, this multimodal hate speech competition, this hate meme by Facebook AI, was recently organized. And in SemiBot 2021, there was a particular competition for toxic span detection, which is given a toxic statement. You have to identify the parts where, due to which the sentence is toxic. After discussing about different detection methods and different modalities, let's move on to the different challenges. Now, one of the important parts is the model evaluation. And many of in NLP talks as well, there are many papers which show how different state-of-the-art methods are flawed. Now, in this method as well, in this paper as well, they found out that hate speech detection is not as easy as you think. And they took mainly two papers which had some wrong evaluations. The first paper was oversampling the data set before train and test. So what happened here is, due to oversampling, there were redundant pairs between train and test. And naturally, the model took upon this redundant pairs and gave a higher performance. The second case is a bit tricky. They actually use a feature extraction method before splitting the train and test. So this again is like seeing the test data set before splitting the data. And hence, again, there was an improvement in performance. Particularly for this, they observed that when they corrected these errors, they saw a drop of 20% in macro reference score. Another interesting aspect is the user overlap. Now, what happens in this social media texts? Often it the models that are trained using this social media text capture user characteristics or user styles instead of the actual task. When they remove this user overlap between train and test set, such that there is no user which is present in both train and test, they again observe a huge drop, as you can see here. The second problem is lack of testing in the wild. For most of the data set, train and test comes from the same distribution. In this paper in 2020, which is recently accepted in ACL 2020, they used different test suits to test this classifiers. One of the examples is shown here, which is like neutral and positive statement about a group. Now, ideally, this should not be classified as hateful in any case. But they observed that for the models like distilled word with Davidson as a dataset, and distilled word with fountain dataset, and perspective API, which is an online API which you can use to detect toxic messages, they found that the performance was very varying. For the first case, which was the neutral statement, the perspective API was performing better, whereas for the other case where it was a positive statement, Davidson model, which is distilled word using Davidson dataset, it performed better. This opens several questions about the robustness of such models in the wild. Now, to understand this problems, one of the interesting phenomena or the required phenomena is explainability. Consider this example here where they are saying that stop calling someone, they'll get rewards. And unfortunately, this statement are actually captured as a hate speech. But without an explanation, we cannot know why this is happening. Hence, explainability is required. The two of the methods are explainability using rationals, and other is free text. So in rationals, usually we highlight some words to justify the label, and in free text, it's more of a like why did they do it, and there is a excerpt which is explaining the label. The dataset Hate Explain, which was recently published in AAA 2021, was the first dataset to include rationals along with the labels. And as you can see, when they trained the rationals with the labels in a model that was named Bert Hate Explain, they observed an increase in performance. Further, another study used a tool to suggest alternate words based on attention scores. Here, they did not use any rational-based dataset, but just use the attention of word to measure such toxic words or the words which are toxic, and then they produced similar word embeddings or similar words which are not toxic. They saw that this actually helped in reducing toxicity of the overall statement, and this can be an effective way of debugging the model. But one of the disadvantages that it may be used by malicious users to understand where the particular model is or focusing, and they may change to indirect or hidden hate speech as well. So one of the one of the important topics in any NLP task is the bias in the data and models. It is true for hate speech as well, and we try to study this through three different directions. The first is how is the data selected, then who is the annotator, and the third is who is the speaker or the target. Now, often hate speech datasets can carry bias related to some identity words. This is due to the fact that most of them are sampled using some keywords. This study focused on this and found that there is an increase in semantic relatedness between corpus and keywords as the number of keywords are increased, which is also visualized in this graph here. This highlights the problem because if the datasets are based on this identity keywords, they may detect hate speech when the identity keywords are used instead of the context it is used. The second part is about who is the annotator. Now, for hate speech datasets, one of the important role played by is the annotators. This is due to the fact that hate speech is often very subjective in nature, as you can already see from the definitions of hate speech. In this study, 2016, they found that data using expert annotators actually performed better than the amateurs when they used the same kind of model. Another study found a significant bias for age and education of the annotator. As you can see in this graphs, there is a significant gap between the red dot and the blue dot. This graph is presented using x-axis as specificity and y-axis as sensitivity. Finally, the last part is about who is the target of hate speech. Now, again, hate speech models can detect false positive based on the tweets written by a different community. This was first highlighted in this paper in 2019, where this showed that black aligned tweets were getting classified as hate more often than the white aligned tweets, which is shown by this value. If the value is greater than 1, it usually shows the property. And as you can see, most of the data sets and even the subclasses have this property present, or they are biased. Now, one of the key strategies to resolve this is using the adversarial laws. Now, to briefly explain what is adversarial laws or adversarial training, let's look into this figure. So there are two types of predictor. One is the label predictor, and another is the community predictor, or maybe the domain predictor. So what happens is the target of these features should be that while these label predictors are more or less correct when they are tested, the domain classifier should be confused. So if the domain classifier is confused, it means that the features are more generalized, and thereby we can mitigate this bias. As you can see, this method is slightly successful in reducing the accuracy of this AE predictor here. Another paper that was published in IIII 2021 found that using rationals can also make the models less biased towards different targets. This is measured using this matrix, and as you can see, what hate explainer, which is using the rationals, is actually higher in this course, which suggests these are less biased. So next I will hand over to Vinny to continue with the mitigation and finally the SWOT analysis.
Thank you, Pranay. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, hello everyone. Myself, Benny Matthew. So I'll be covering the topics mitigation of hate speech and the SWOT analysis. So let's start with. So I think we are a little behind the schedule, so I'll try to go a bit fast. So in the previous section, as Puneja has explained, we can use the models to detect hate speech. And once this detection part is done, the social media organizations as well as the companies have several options available. So these include the deletion of the post, the suspension of the user account. You could do shadow banning or other options as well. So these things we have already seen. But there are several issues associated with these options. The foremost of them being the clash with freedom of speech. So there are alternatives that are coming up. Among them is the counter speech campaign by Facebook. There is also ADL, which is also trying to make the online space much more safer. Then we have the No Hate Speech campaign that is currently in Europe, and We Counter Hate is another organization which is trying to make the Twitter space more safe for everyone. Now, countries also have hate speech laws in place, which would help in making the online spaces better. So, excuse me, just. Yeah. So the one of the issues with the country-specific hate speech laws is that the definition varies. So the hate speech definition that is applicable in one country might not be applicable in another. So if there are models being deployed on a country-specific level, they need to take such nuances into account. Now, let's look first at the banning aspect of hate speech. So in 2015, Reddit had closed several subreddits due to the violation of the Reddit's anti-harassment policies. The foremost among those subreddits were two of them, the Fat People Hate and the Cone Town. So one of the studies that people were interested in looking into were how effective was the ban. So one of the works, you can't say here, the efficacy of Reddit's 2015 ban actually did a pretty good study, and they concluded that such a ban was pretty helpful from Reddit's point of view. So what they found was the results from two points of view, the user level effect of the ban and the community level effect of the ban. So from a user level effect of the ban, what they found was a significant portion of the users from the ban community had actually left Reddit completely. Right, and following the ban, Reddit also saw a decrease in 80% of the usage of the hate word. So before the ban and after the ban, they compared the usage of keywords and they found that overall there was an 80% decrease in the usage. For the banned community of the users, those who remained active had drastically reduced the community. So you can see this is the point at which the ban was implemented. So CT is the Coon Town subreddit and FPH is the Fat People Hate subreddit. So we can see as after the ban, the usage had decreased significantly. Now, from a community level effect, we can see the, they also saw that following the ban, the affected users had actually migrated to other parts of the subreddits. So these included subreddits such as the Donald, Homemake, or Black Crime Matters, where the racist behavior were either noted or were prevalent. But the migrant users had not actually bring any hate speech with them to the new community, nor did the long-time existing users in these communities pick it up. So in a sense, the authors concluded that the Reddit did not spread the infection. Next, we look into another form of countering hate speech, which is the doctrine of counter speech. So what the doctrine basically says is that the proper response to a negative speech, such as hate speech, is counter it with a positive expression. So one of the main advantages and the reason that it is advocated is because it is faster, it is flexible and responsive. So anyone can do counter speech from anywhere and doesn't have any form of barrier, be it in the language or the cultural aspect. So some of the examples of the counter speech that I have shown. So these, so users might say something that is specific to a community. So like in this example, they're blaming Muslims for some of the aspects, and then anyone. So in this case, it was the We Counter Hate community, which had simply stated that this tweet has been countered. Think twice before repeating as such is there. Right. So such counter speech could actually help in reducing the impact of the hate speech. Now, there are different types of counter speech that are possible, and in 2016 Banish paper, they have presented some of them. So I'll just go through the 8 different parts that they have talked about. The first type of counter speech is in which the counter speaker is actually presenting facts to discourage the statement or for misperceptions. So this is an example in which the interviewer had said that the homosexuality is nature, it's detrimental and destructive to society. And a counter speaker had simply stated factual statements like the homosexuality is pretty natural and all known species of animal have gay communities as such. So this is a form of counter speech using facts. Next is when the counter speaker uses hypocrisy or contradictions to counter hate speech. So this one example from Twitter where the user has written, when Muslims tweet kill all Christians, it's called as terrorist threat. And when a Christian says kill all Muslims, it's called as freedom hypocrisy. The third type is where the counter speaker could warn of some offline or online consequences of the hate speech. So these could include, so this was in with respect to the gay community, and the counter speaker has said that the preacher should be arrested for the sexual harassment in the institution. So people have actually lost jobs due to such counter speech as well, where the hate speaker had said something and the counter speakers actually had offline consequences. Next is the affiliation strategy, in which the counter speaker tries to affiliate with either the community of the hate speaker or the community that is being affected. In the example that I've shown, the counter speaker has affiliated with both the communities and tried to use a positive tone in some sense to deter the hate. Next, another popular form is visual communication, where they people usually use images to counter hate speech. The sixth strategy is pretty direct, like you denounce the hate speech, calling it as hateful or dangerous. So maybe it's like, maybe you're not racist, but that's a racist thing to say. Or basically, kill all Muslims is literally the most disgraceful thing I've seen on Twitter. The seventh type, which is actually among the most popular strategy used, is the humorous sarcasm. So in this, popular user had tweeted, ISIS leaders, we urgently call upon every Muslim to join the fight, especially those in the land of the true shrines. And a speaker who has countered this tweet, saying, too busy being part of the civilized and functioning society. Also, Sherlock season 4 is in 4 days. I can't miss the first episode. And the final type of counter speech that Benish had used is the tone category. So it's a pretty general category. I mean, they have said tone as in positive or negative tone, but it's generally seen that the positive tone is effective while the negative tone doesn't help at all. Next, Benish also looked into the considerations for a successful. One of the areas which are, which is pretty hard to study. So how do you actually say that a counter speech is successful? So from one way to call a counter speech is successful is to say that it has a favorable impact on the actual hateful user. So that might cause any shift in the discourse or of the conversation or his or her belief. So one way to study this would be to look into if the hate speaker has actually done any apology, recantation, or actually the deletion of the original tweet itself. So this is one such example where the person was actually reminded that what he has said was pretty insensitive, and the person later on deleted the tweet. So this would be an instance of a successful counter speech. The second type of success would be to have a positive effect on the discourse of the norms. And this is from the audience point of view. So this would be when the bystanders, the cyber bystanders, would be actually going through the conversation, and what these positive, if the counter speech would be having a positive effect on the cyber bystanders, then we would call it as a successful counter speech. So based on the analysis that they have done, Benich has actually recommended strategies which talk about the consequences, where the hate speaker is labeled, or empathy, affiliation, and humor and images as the recommended strategies, as these tend to have a positive effect on the hate speaker, whereas strategies which actually use hostile or aggressive tones, or use factual statements, or using harassing and silencing language doesn't actually have any positive impact on the counter speech. So next we'll actually look into some of the studies which has actually done this. So this from a work, Thou Shall Not Hate. So in this, the authors have actually studied YouTube comments. So the videos were hateful in nature, and they looked into the counter hate comments present in the YouTube videos. So what they found is, like, different communities seems to be adopting different strategies of counter speech. So the authors found that in case of the African American community, the counter speakers usually call out racism and talk about the consequences of their actions. So these are some of the examples where they say, like, I hope these cops get fired, this bullshit. Next, the authors found that in case of the Jewish community, they observed that people tend to affiliate with both the target and the source community to counter the hate messages. Right. Also, there was a recent work, the racism virus, in which they study the anti-Asian hate in presence of the COVID crisis. And what they basically found was the counter hate messages seems to be discouraging the users from turning hateful in the first place. So on the left side of the image, you can actually see on the the x-axis is the number of hateful neighbors and the risk of being hateful. So as the hateful neighbors are increasing, the risk of becoming hateful is also increasing. And on the right side, you can see as the number of counter neighbors are increasing, the risk of becoming hateful is a bit low. So the difference is less, but the difference was statistically significant. Next, we talk about the datasets available for the hate speech. So actually, the research in hate speech has been pretty new. I think one of the earliest datasets was from 2019, and there's not much available. So the ones that we were able to collect, we have present in the slide. So the major sources that people usually go for are YouTube, 2 datasets are available, and then Twitter dataset, as well as Gab and Reddit. There is one dataset, which is the Conan dataset, in which the counter speech is actually generated by expert NGO people who have been trained for such tasks. I'll talk about this a bit later. So coming to the task of counter speech generation. So the core idea here is to directly intervene in the discussion with the textual responses that are actually meant to counter the hateful content and prevent it from further spreading. So one way to do this is the humans themselves can do it, but then the issue is that it's not scalable. Also, one of the major issues is usually what has been seen is that the onus of counter speech usually falls on the target population, and they are already there is not a good proportion of them available online. So the counter speech by the affected community might not be a good idea. So to tackle this problem, researchers have tried to use natural language generation systems. These include your sequence to sequence model, BART, BERT, OpenAI's GPT, all these off-the-shelf models. And then using these models, is it possible to generate a counter speech for a particular hate speech? That is the overall problem that they are trying to tackle. So this is one example taken from the intervene dataset. So user 1 is actually talk about foreign relationships with regards to, claiming from blaming CMFR members. And then another user has a respondent saying a hateful thing about the Jews. So a human counter speakers could say something like using race and religiously disrespectful to attempt to prove a point is ridiculous and offensive. And we could have a counter speech system which could also generate responses. The language is highly offensive. All ethnicities and social groups deserve problems. Right. So the advantage here is that such counter speech, if the models are built properly, are easier to generate. So the task would be then generally, so if you were to implement it, so you could have a system that first detects the hate speech. Now, based on the hate speech, and if possible, you can also try to model the user characteristics, generate an appropriate counter speech, which might be successful in stopping the spread. Now, the issue with the counter speech generation in the current scenario is the lack of sufficient quality data. And the second issue that many of the researchers are actually trying is to tackle the issue of generic or repetitive responses. Right. So next, I'll talk about some of the counter speech collection strategies, which were listed in Tekiroglu 2020. So the first is the crawl method. In here, what is done basically is that the counter speech, the hate speech is collected using a mix of linguistic patterns, and then they manually annotate the replies as either being hate counter speech or not counter speech. So the advantage here is that all the materials collected are made up of natural or real occurrences of hate counter pairs. The second is the crowdsourcing technique, which was used in Quinn et al. Here also the hate speech is collected and annotated manually. The difference is instead of using a reply, actually going through the replies, here they instruct the crowd workers who are not experts to write possible responses to such hateful content. So in this case, the content is obtained in control setting as opposed to the crawling up. The third is the niche sourcing technique. In this also, you first collect the hate speech, and then instead of using non-experts as in the crowd method, here the crowd speech is written by expert NGOs. So these are the people who have been trained to fight online hatred, and textual responses by them are much more qualitative and diverse as compared to the non-experts. Now, the authors themselves propose a new framework, the author review framework. So the framework is basically like this. So an author will be there. So this could be a natural language generation system that is trained on one of the previous data sets. And the author will generate a set of counter speech, right? So the author is tasked with the text generation task. Then the reviewers, which could be humans or classifier models, they filter the counter speech based on several criteria, right? And then we also have a post editing phase in which an NGO operator will be going through the data and filtering them. So the authors have claimed that the framework is scalable and allows you to obtain data sets that are suitably in terms of diversity, novelty, and quantity. So these are some of the examples of the machine generated counter speech. So as we don't have much time, I'll just quickly go through it. So you can have conversations where they talk about, particular communities. The models like seek-to-seek, which are the basic ones, might talk generic responses. This is not allowed, and it's not the time to treat people by their skin color. Reinforcement learning might generate, I do not use the racial slur, all these. So one of the issues that you might observe here is that the responses are pretty generic in nature, and some of the responses might not be contextual. So use of R word is unacceptable. Well, and they have not used any R word in the hate speech, right? So these are some of the issues that are still there. So to tackle this, recent paper, Generate Prune Select, which is a pipeline for counter speech generation, they have proposed a method. So what they have said is that, so if you have a hate speech like this, many of the methods might be generating non-relevant or commonplace responses. So to solve this issue, what the authors have proposed is a three-step procedure. So the first one is to you have some initial counter speech available. I'm sorry. So these could be from the previous data set itself. And we could generate several candidates from the model. So the once the model, I'm sorry. So using the initial counter speech, you can generate lots of candidate counter speech, right? So we could have several candidate pools like this. Next, and the counter speech generation is done by one of the natural language generation models, be it your variational autoencoder, BART, or any of the available ones. The second is the candidate pruning. So in this step, basically from the available pool, we are pruning out all the candidates which might be ungrammatical or might not make sense. For this also, the authors have basically used a BERT-based language model, which looks for the grammatical correctness, etc. So you can have several criteria here. And the third step is a response collection, which is a retrieval model, which ranks the outcomes based on several criteria. So the model is actually shown to generate much better responses as compared to the previous models. So these are some of the examples, like if you feed in the model hate speech, like what is the point of listening to Black women, you could have a pretty diverse output. Like the point of listening to Black women and the women in general is that they could broaden and enlighten the view of the world. So these are some of the counter speech generated by the GPS system, which is Generate, Prune, and Select. So the responses are actually very diverse and pretty on point as compared to the previous models. So I would say currently this is one of the best models that we have seen. Finally, I would like to talk about the treatment after. So this was one of the studies that I would say has actually implemented and shown the effect. So this is by Munger et al. From 2016. The author basically what they did was they collected a sample of Twitter users who have harassed others, and in this case, the authors have fixed it to the Black community. So these are the white users who were harassing the Black community, and the author has actually used control accounts to sanction the harassers. So these are bots, and the bots have specific properties that the authors can set. So these could be in terms of the number of followers or the race of the author. So the author created several Twitter accounts, and then based on the hate speech, they provide counter speech. So this is one example. So one user has said hate speech, and the author using a profile. So in this case, it's a black person, right? And then he writes a generic counter speech. Hey man, just remember that these are real people who you heard, and you harass and talk to them in a kind language. So you can observe that the author has actually changed this later on as well. So in this case, the same kind of counter speech, but with a avatar of a black white person. So overall, what the author found was that the subjects who were countered following with a high follower white male had actually significantly reduced their use of racial slur. So what this in a sense mean that if the counter speaker is someone who is powerful or popular, as well as from an in-group person. So if I am a white person who is hate speaker from a white person, and if the counter speaker is also from the white same community, the counter speech seems to have much more effect as compared to a person which is outgroup. So that will be all with respect to the counter speech. Next, I'll just quickly go through the SWOT analysis, where we compress all the information that we have. So in terms of the strength of the hate speech in the current scenario is that there is a growing interest in the scientific community across different disciplines. And cross-disciplinary work is much encouraged, and I mean that would be pretty beneficial as well. Next is the availability of deep neural architecture, specially engineered for hate speech detection. And if you go through the Hugging Face models, I mean, if you go to the site, you can see several hate speech models available, and you can just load and run them very easily in 5 or 10 lines of code. So next is the extension of the hate speech to multiple languages are available. So one example is the DE limit. This is also available in Hugging Face. Then datasets for multiple modes are also becoming more and more available. So these include images, videos, text, etc. And there is currently several counter speech initiatives going by the NGOs and tech giants. And finally, for the researchers, several research grants are coming up. There are several competitions available, share tasks there, and dedicated workshops for the hate. Coming to the weaknesses of the current literature, one of the main issues that we have also found is the inconsistency in the annotation. So this is actually one of the root problems due to which several other problems pop up in terms of the bias or the generalizability of the models itself. So this is one of the main weaknesses in the current state. Next is the lack of standardization. So different data sets and papers use different terminologies, and while the differences might be nuanced, when you go and implement this, these differences might mean a lot, and the model performance might be affected. Next is a lack of generalizability of the models. As I said, if you train the model on one data set and try to test it on totally a same data set, I mean, same in the sense that they have also used the same definition, it might not work at all. Then the scarcity of the multilingual and multimodal data. So most of the data sets still available are in English. Although more and more work is coming in new languages, it's still less. Then the issue of the bias in the data as well as in the models. And then finally, the lack of explainability in the models. So many of the work which might claim state-of-the-art performance might be because of some artifacts in the data set itself and might not actually be doing so. So next is the opportunity. So all the weaknesses that I've said actually might be thought of as an opportunity as well. So I'll explicitly go through some of the current opportunities that might be coming. So one area is hateful user detection, and one of the works by new works were by Ribeiro et al. So this is one such example. Times up, you are getting what should have happened long ago. So if you consider the text alone, you would not consider this as hate speech. But if you were to look into the account of the user who has posted it, you would see that there's a lot of white supremacy images in his profile. So if you have the information of the user available and then look into this particular tweet, you can understand that this is the tweet is anti-Semitic in nature. So Ribeiro has actually done the modeling where he has used the user information as well. So the advantages here is basically it helps in contextualizing some of the tweets and the user, so the moderation at a user level becomes more feasible. So one of the issues with this is again the annotation guidelines, like how do you tell a user, I mean annotator to say, to find something that is hateful or not. a lot of new problems are also coming up. So one is the possible interaction of fake news with hate speech. Another is the emergence of some of the derivatives, or I would say related problems. So these could be free speech or dangerous speech as such. So the usual model of hate speech might not work for this sort of problems, and we might need separate models altogether for this. In terms of the main threats that we should look out for is that newer methods for promoting hate speech are there, like hate codes, which could be very difficult to identify with any of the models. Then recently, like many of the platforms are also cropping up, like Parler, which might act as a alternative to Twitter. I mean, several of the normal platforms, and these might become echo chambers for hateful users. And finally, the main issues, I mean, I would say is like the government agencies and political parties could weaponize the hate speech itself and then use them for their own advantage. So that will be all. Finally, I would give the control back to Punejoy, and he can talk about the resources, the Notion page, and the demos as well.
Thanks, Puneet. So let me share my screen. So this will be just a brief demo of tutorials and also the Notion page. In the meantime, if you have any questions, you can ask in the chat. Since we are already out of time, so you can ask the questions now. Anyways, you can see the screen, right?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will just show a brief demo about this model. So we have this rational predictor model, which is based on this hate explain dataset, and it contains it can predict the labels and the rationals. And rationals are again the highlighted words which justify. So let's. So I will not go through the details, but this is simply the code is already available, and you can just run all these cells, and by that you can run this one. So we have two methods to input the model. One is a file. So you can provide a CSV file and you can get the predictions, or you can input a text to just see how it works. So here is a simple example. So let's say I hate. That's so sorry for the use of hate speech, but that's necessary to show that. This is more like an example of hate speech. So I input that. You can again run this models and it will finally show the prediction probabilities and the rational. So here you can see that the rational. So it is not only about the target probability, but the entire hate all blacks is highlighted here. So there are some here are some extra examples that we have for this model. In this context, you can see that it is particularly identifying the derivative keywords. Here, the entire statement is more or less as justification. One of the interesting example was where the label was kind of, it was not sure about the hate, but the rationale was predicted correct. And other examples are also. So this code is entirely available on GitHub. Now let's move. Yeah, so we also have this Notion where we have the collection of papers. So I think it is already shared. So maybe you have seen it already. If not, then just let me go through. So here we have tried to provide a list of papers. Although it is, we have tried to cover most of the papers, but it may not be exhaustive. So you are welcome to comment on this. If you are missing some type of data sets or some conferences, you can mention that. And when you are just like entering this page, you will be a viewer and you can only search on the page. If you click on this duplicate button, which can be available here or some in the top right corner, you will see a duplicate button, and if you click that duplicate button, you can then use filtering and sorting on this data on this resource. We also provide a form which can be used to enter new papers. So you can add a paper if you see that there is not already covered. And there are different examples, and we have also provided a demo to help you with the usage of this tool. I'm looking forward to your contribution with this. You can find the other codes which are almost similar in nature to the one I already showed in this GitHub page. So please go there and try out this code. And if you have any issues, you can always create issues, and we'll be ready to resolve them. So I think this will be all from our side.
So yeah, if any of you have any further questions, please let us know. And all the camera, if it's not a big issue, so that we can take a screenshot.
So should we share the front page?
Yeah, maybe you can. Yeah, you can share the front page. So, Didi, can you please take the screenshot? Dini, are you there?
Yeah, I'm taking this screenshot. Yeah, done.
Okay, thank you. So, please let us know more questions. Like we are already.
I think
like
our Slack
10
channel will
minutes.
remain open, so you can post your questions there also.
Yeah, so all through the conference, the Slack channel will remain open. And like if you have any other questions, you can post on the Slack channel, or you can write to us by email, or just tweet alert. So, Stefan, you were asking for some paper. May I know which paper is this?
So I think this is the recast paper that is accepted to say CSCW. So once we share the slides, you can then access the paper.
all the papers will be there. All the references are there. Yeah, we will share all the slides as well as the references to all the papers that we have used to prepare our slides on the same tutorial website. Okay, if there are no further questions, then we will bid adieu. Thank you very much for being